Hello and welcome to another episode of the OMC video blog. This is episode 5. My name is Garv, and today we're going to take a look at something I thought would be pretty interesting to talk about. I know we talk a lot about video games and game development stuff, but that's kind of a thing, and so I kind of like talking about that. But today we're going to talk about writing. We're going to get down into writing. We're going to take a look at how to make cohesive writing. You know, like if you want to make a story, you want your story to be cohesive and you want it to all make sense over the course of the whole project. That actually, I think, takes a lot of work. I know it seems easy, but when you're crafting a story, there are all these little pieces, and all those pieces all come together to make one big package. And I feel like some people have a really good talent for making sure that all of the pieces connect. So as your story goes on, people are compelled to follow because there aren't all these weird things that happen in the story. I know that one of the things that people talk about when they talk about writing in general is they talk about how it all fits together. And cohesiveness is one of the important pieces of writing a really good, compelling story. So, when you're thinking about that and you're looking at some other medium, let's say you're reading a book or you're watching a TV show or you're writing a game or playing a game or whatever. And a lot of, especially like different types of games, RPGs and those kind of things, tend to have a story focus. I mean, because they're RPGs, if you play D&D, then you know D&D generally has some kind of story going and you just kind of follow that. And so that's kind of the RPG, what defines like an RPG. But then also reading books and stuff, unless you're reading nonfiction. But even nonfiction a lot of time has a narrative underneath. Like even if you're reading about what happened in World War II with Hitler, right? There's still a story that kind of fills itself out as all the pieces kind of fall into place. And having all of that be cohesive, where it all fits together, where all the pieces fit together to form one big thing, is extremely difficult. So we're going to talk about, what makes a cohesive story in the first place? Like, what makes it cohesive? But let's just think about, let's say you're going to build something. Let's say you've got a pile of Legos and you want to build something. Your imagination is going to run wild and you're going to build whatever. As you put the pieces together to decide what it is that you're going to make in the first place, at the end, your end piece, when you're done with whatever it is that you made, all those pieces that are going to make it feel like one really well done piece. That's going to include the colors that you choose, the blocks that you use to put it together. How did you fill out like the little edges? Like, because especially with Lego blocks, you got those pieces that are just rectangles or squares or something, and so like how do you, like if you want to make something round, how do you go about doing that in the whole piece, and your color scheme and all those things, how all those pieces fit together and ultimately give you that thing in the end that people look at it and go, wow, that's well put together, because it all fits, everything works. And so if you're looking at a story, just like anything else, then that's the same thing. All those little pieces that fit together, that creates a cohesive final product that people go, wow, that makes a lot of sense. I can totally understand why, how that works and why the characters did what they did and the whole nine. So when you're writing a story, I think one of the important pieces that you need to decide in the very, very first thing is, what's your medium going to be? Are you writing a book? Are you writing a novella? Are you writing a game? Are you writing a TV show or movie or whatever it is, right? You need to look at your medium, and then from your medium, that will help you to decide what kind of story you're going to be able to tell. Because book stories are a lot different than writing a story for a movie or a TV show or a video game or something like that. Some of the basic pieces are still true, like you want to have good plotting, you want to have make sure that everything flows together well, so all of the little scenes all flow well. The pacing has to be good. All those things are true regardless of what medium. But how you tell the story is very important. And that will decide like what you're ultimately trying to do as far as putting it all together in one piece. Well, for example, let's say that you're writing a book. Well, when you're writing a book, it's really difficult to chop it all up because, book, the person's going to read it and they're going to read it in one block. Like they're going to read it all in one piece. Now you can divide it up into, book 1, book 2, book 3, but basically the reader, the way they're interacting with this is the reading page. So flow is very important because you're trying to keep the person who's reading, you're trying to keep them engaged and interested over the pages. So page 1 to page 50, you want them to go, wow, I couldn't put it down. It was great. The plotting was good. The characters were great. The way the story flowed was good. As opposed to when you're telling a movie, in the movie, you have, in some cases, you want to show, not tell, right? If your movie gets into a point where it becomes very preachy, like you got people telling you what they're thinking. A good example of this is, I don't know if you guys remember an old movie, but it was an old movie named Dune. It was based on the books, the Dune books. And they adapted those books to the movie. And this was the 80s, I think. And the interesting thing about that is, in the book, there's a lot of stuff going on in the character's head, and we get to get into the head of the characters so that we kind of know what they're thinking as the story goes on. In the movie, they tried to do some of that. So like, you're looking at the scene, and then in the background you'll hear, it's the spice, and you're going, why do I need to know that? I can just see that, or maybe the characters can talk about it in a way. And so I felt like they were trying to adapt the books in the movie directly, and that kind of thing doesn't happen. Like in movies, I think TV shows and movies and stuff, you generally want to do show, not tell, right? You want to just show what's going on instead of telling them what's going on. And so deciding a medium that's your first step. So once you decide, okay, this is what we're going to do, we're going to write a book or whatever. So we're going to write a book. And so then from that point, I think the next point is to decide, well, who is your target audience? I say that because if you are targeting, I don't know, young males, you're targeting young males, right? Most young dudes don't want to deal with some romance thing. So if you're trying to write a romance novel for young dudes, generally that doesn't work. Maybe that works for young women, but even young women, maybe they may not be interested in that directly. So, you got to look at, well, who's my audience? Like, who am I making this for? And I think the tone of what you're making has to fit whatever that audience is that you're trying to connect with. A lot of times, like for my own stuff, like I tend to pick a genre that I feel like fits with people who grew up around the time that I grew up, so in the 70s, 80s, like people who grew up in that time. Things that were popular back then, Blade Runner, stuff like that. Like when I'm writing myself, I tend to think about people who are around that age, and they're looking at it and they're going, oh, I remember that from that time. And so they're more likely to jump in. Or, the high fantasy, people who really like high fantasy type stuff, like I like writing that too. So, I tend to pick like, okay, this is kind of what I'm going with. These are the type of people who are probably going to be reading my stuff. I tend to look at it that way because I think that audience mismatch can cause a problem, where people read your stuff and go, that wasn't for me, or the way it's advertised or the way it's laid out, maybe, it's got some cover with, some romance thing, but when you read it, it's an adventure story. It's sometimes like that mismatch, where you're trying you're not writing for the audience that you think you are. So I think laying that down in the beginning is important, like whether you're going for an action story or you're going for a romance or maybe a historical type thing, historical fiction or whatever. And so that needs to be decided. And once you decide that in the beginning, now you can lay down the groundwork for your story. Now, once you get around to that, there are a couple of ways that people start to lay down their ideas. I think one of the things that is that's different from writer to writer is how they lay down and plot their stories. I can't speak for everybody, but I'll just talk about mine because I know how I do it. How I plot my own stories is pretty simple. Basically, I have a notebook. And I put everything in my notebook and I write down like who the characters are, like who my main character is and all that stuff. The way I lay it out is if it is nonfiction. In other words, if I'm sitting here and my character is sitting across from me and we're having a conversation, is how I write it down. This person told me that, this kind of thing. And I lay down my notes like that. And to be honest, I don't get into the little details. I leave room for things to flow as the story is being written. But the key points I always write down. Like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Like, this is a key point. Like, I want this, and then I want that, and this, and this. And that, I feel like, keeps me straight. So that when I'm actually writing, I kind of have this, not script, but kind of this general flow of how things are gonna go, and I just follow that. There are people who believe that they want a more freeform way to do things, so everything is off the cuff, like everything. Like, they may have a basic idea. This is cyberpunk about a dude who's, trying to revenge his family, right? Okay, so that's the basis of this. And then from that point, then they go, okay, well then if that's the main story, well, let's just write it. Let's just get in there and let's write it. But I feel like sometimes with that, like, that idea is great. When I first started, like many moons ago, when I first started writing in junior high school or whatever, I was just writing things down. I used to do it that way. But one of the problems I found, especially when going back and reading some of my old stuff, is that a lot of the details, a lot of the key points were made off of the cuff, and some of them don't fit. So, like, you have a line here like this, and then at some point, you just start going off the rails, right? And so your story is just going off the rails. You're trying to get to this point here, but you're going and going, and then you're off, and then now you got to get back to kind of where you want to go because you just meandered into things that don't matter. And so it's why a lot of people, when they do like even this video for that matter, like I wrote down like some general things I want to talk about so that it don't meander, right? You don't get points in your thinking where your brain goes off into space, and now you're too far away from the thing that you're actually trying to do, and now you've got to bring everything back down. And that is a lot harder to do than to just basically say, okay, these are the ground rules for how this thing is going to go. I'm going to do this point and that point and this point and that point. But you still want, some flow in between where you want a lot of it to be organic, right? So in between points, this point and that point, there's some organic stuff that goes on that you just made up as you go. Because like I said, I tend to think about the person that I'm talking about is telling me the story. So as I'm writing, I'm imagining it. They're telling me what's going on. And so I tend to follow that rule as I go on. So they're telling me the story, and as I'm just jotting it down. All I'm doing is chronicling their adventure. But you can do it off the cuff. Like, and so there's some people who are really, really good at that. They can keep it all in their head, and they just do everything off the cuff. But I feel like, again, with a lot of that, you end up, there's some meandering somewhere, just because, you get into one, like, for example, you start with some idea about this guy who lived in a particular country, and you want to talk a little bit about the country that person lived in. But as you're telling that story, you get too much into the country politics. Like, it starts off where you're talking about the basic, this is what that country is about, but that leads into, if you just let it go, it leads off into the politics and stuff, and next thing you know, you've spent like 10-15 pages on that, and now you're way off base, and so now you've got to bring it back around to get back on track. And then, of course, some people, like I said, some of that stuff's fluid. So therefore, as you're going, they go off, and then they're just like, you know what? I'm just going to keep going. Like, I'm already off the path, so I'm just going to keep going. I don't like that much personally. I do feel like there's got to be an organicness to it, but at the same time, I think a little bit of structure is good. It just keeps you grounded. It keeps you grounded on what you're actually doing. And so, I take notes. I don't have a problem with that. I take notes. I take notes for everything that I write, whether it's my books. So if you read the Skullforge stories or the Blood City stories, like all those things, I wrote all those things with notes. I had things laid down. And then once I did that, then I was able to lay it down. And same thing with Skullforge, the game. I wrote everything, the key points down, like what she's actually trying to accomplish, and then went on from there. Now, one other way that you can do things is you can actually start with the beginning and the end. I feel like one of the things that people mess up a lot is the ending. And I think that's because a lot of times people don't write the ending. They don't write what's going to happen at the end. They think, okay, well, this is how it starts. But I haven't thought about how that thing is going to finish. I just know that in the beginning it starts off like this. And this guy does that, and that's the beginning. And now I'm going to just write it. One of the things that I felt like was one of the real down spots of, say, the Mass Effect series, is I feel like that they didn't have the ending planned. They didn't think about what was going to happen at the end. Even if after they realized, okay, we have episode 1, chapter 1 of that story, so Mass Effect 1, okay, done. We laid it down. It became successful. Okay, great. So now, if we're going to carry this thing out in 3 parts, then we need to block down how those pieces work together so we can get to a really satisfying conclusion. And I feel like that they didn't do that, or if they did, they changed something so drastically that by the time they got to the end, they didn't know what to do. So they were like, well, all those choices that you made, we didn't really plan out what was going to happen, so we don't know. So we're just going to throw in this thing where you can just choose the red thing or the blue thing or the, you know what I mean? Like, it's, I personally don't do it that way. Like, I know, like, if my game, book story, or whatever is going to be more than 1 part, then I script out the whole thing. Like, what is the beginning and what is the very, very end? Like, what am I actually trying to get to? Like, what's the point? And then break that down into the pieces. So if they're going to be three parts, so if I got 3 books, then each book is laid out so I know what's going to happen in each book so that they can all culminate to the final thing that I had already planned. And what this means for cohesion is, as a reader reads from the beginning and they get to the end, then the feeling that they should walk away with is, wow, that all fit together. Like, it totally made sense. And that means that if they go back to chapter 1 and they read that there are some little hints and things about where we're going, some foreshadowing about where we're going. And even if it's going back that far, that by the time they get to the end, they should be able to go back and go, I understand, because that was foreshadowed in the beginning. And that ending makes sense. And that leads to your character motivations, why they do what they do, and all that stuff. And people don't take that. Some people take that for granted, like it'll just naturally work itself out. But I think when you get to the point to where characters do things that don't make any sense, or you need to get from this point to this point, but you never plotted out like how that was going to happen. So now you got to do what I like to call an ass pull, and that is when you pull something out of your ass and you go, okay, that's how that problem's gonna be solved. I'm just gonna pull something out from nowhere, and that's gonna be the thing that's gonna drive this thing going forward. I think when you get to that point, a lot of times that takes people out, and then they go, whoa, wait a minute. I never saw that coming. And it didn't make sense in a good way. It was just something that just was thrown out there because the author or the writer or whoever was putting this together didn't think about how to get to that point logically. It's one of the reasons why I feel like time travel is used a lot, because time travel itself allows you to cheat. If I can't figure out how to get from here to there normally, I can always go back in time and fix it. So, I couldn't get to that point? Well, you know what? Some meta thing happens, person gets sent back through time, and now my problem can be solved because now we're in a different timeline and we can go on from there. I'm not a big fan of that because I feel like time travel is cheap, and granted, it's my personal opinion. I don't really use time travel in my writing because I think, like I said, time travel is kind of cheap. It's that thing you use when you're like, I don't know what to do. Well, then people love time travel, so let's time travel it up. Here we go. And so it breaks the cohesion, and so you've got that story that needs to be told, but you start breaking pieces because you didn't plan what was going to happen between this part and that point, and now you don't know how to connect those two pieces. And so that leads to these weird creative things where you're just throwing stuff out and you're just seeing what sticks. I also am not a big fan of when stories are trying to tell a cohesive story that you can understand from the beginning to the end. But in there, they throw these dramatic curveballs into the story. And there's a particular series or writer that I feel like does it a lot, where they'll lay the ground rules, and this is how you get started, because you're like, these are the ground rules. These are kind of how the story is formed. These are all the rules in the world that these characters live in. And everything is good. But then at some point they go, I think we want to throw a curveball here. And then they'll just break their rules completely. Like, they'll just go, okay, all the rules that we told you about up to this point, you know what? Forget them. Boom, break them, and now we're going to go on with whatever. To me, personally, that takes me out. Like, the moment I read that and they're just like, that thing that, you can't, so if they say, okay, so for example, magic can't break the time barrier. So you can manipulate things, you can pick things up, you can do all that stuff, magic, but they're very adamant that magic can't break the time barrier. Can't do it. But yet we get into the story and then something weird happens. And then you find out, actually by some weird ass-pulley thing, you can actually use magic to manipulate the timing. And it's like, okay, so wait a minute, you spent all this time telling us that this can't happen, and then you just totally take that and throw it out and say, you know what? It's just a bunch of BS, man. And I'm not saying that can't be used as a plot point. But I feel like sometimes it can be used too much. Like everything that you talk about can be broken. At that point, how can you believe anything as far as the readers go, whether it's your game or whether it's whatever? Like, how can your readers be connected if you're just gonna throw everything on its head, 3 or 4 chapters later, or in Act 3, you're gonna go, you know what? Throw all that to the wind. We're just gonna do whatever at that point. I do feel like that if you want to keep things cohesive, and let's say you are gonna break a rule. I do feel like a little foreshadowing in the beginning. Like in the beginning, like something happens weird, and you go, okay, that's a little strange. But okay, all right. But then you break that rule, and then you can go back and go, okay, well, they kind of told us that was going to happen. But then you can explain like, oh, this is why that rule, because we didn't know, and now we have some other knowledge, other than the way that you see it a lot is just some dude. He just more powerful than everybody else, and he can just break it. You can't, and here you go. He just can't, and you just accept the fact that he can. And that's where I feel like that cohesion, when you're trying to tell your story and you want all your pieces to match. And so even if you think about it's your characters, it's your world, your story, all the pieces in it, that by the time you get to the end, then your reader should be like, okay, that makes sense. I can totally understand that. It's when you throw curveballs, and you see it all the time in media, like especially manga and stuff. Like it's like they never think about the ending, like what's going to happen at the end. And so everything is put together, but the ending is not plotted out. So everything is open-ended until they get to a point and they're like, we got to end this thing. Well, how are we going to do that? And I feel like that's one of those things that if you read enough manga or comic books, you'll find that a lot of them have some really disappointing endings. And you're just like, you guys didn't think about this in the beginning? You didn't think about where you were going to end up in order to have a real ending to your story? And that is probably something that I'll probably talk about at a later date, and that is just endings in general, like how to get a good ending to your story that people walk away and are happy with. But I think the whole piece of the story, all of the pieces merge together to form that one cohesive piece that people go, wow, that all makes sense. And one of the things, before I end this, I want to say that one of the things that you can, if you're trying to avoid that, let's say you're writing your own stuff and you're trying to avoid that, I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to not do multiple parts. Multiple parts makes it really difficult later to plot it down, because you've got one piece and then it's got all these threads, right? And then you've got your next part, and your next part has to connect to that, but it's its own story, but it still has to connect to that, and then that piece has to connect to the next piece. And so you've got part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6, and so on and so forth. And sometimes when you get to that, and if you don't plot out far enough, let's say you're just making it up as you go, and you don't plot out far enough, and you don't lay things down in a good way, that by the time you get to the end, and you didn't lay everything out properly, that now you're at a point where you can't connect everything in a nice, neat, interesting way. It's the point where characters get to what they call character assassinations, where they do things that you're just like, whoa, that doesn't make any sense. Why that character do that? I feel like a lot of that comes from writers not thinking about where they want that character to go. And they've written all this other stuff, but now they got to wrap it up. And they just don't know how to wrap it up in a way. So in order to get to the thing that they want to happen, or that they figure that they can do, the character will do some out of character in order to get to that point. Or some character will do something that you go, whoa, wait a minute, that I can't understand why that character did that, in order to get to that point. And it's a pitfall of writing, but hey, you've probably watched a TV show or a movie or played a game or something that did exactly that, One of those things has probably happened. You've probably experienced, not probably, if you played enough stuff, read enough stuff, watched enough stuff, you've seen that happen. And I think that that's one of those things that can be fixed if you plot your story out better in the beginning. Now, I know that sometimes it's a little difficult because you don't know how long your story is going to go, especially in the case of, like, say, One Piece or something that's been going like forever. But even then, I do feel like you can always, if you're evolving your story, then you can still plot it out. Like, okay, well, we're on chapter 900 and something. Well, this is our story now. Well, then let's think about where we're gonna go by the time we reach chapter 1000. This is kind of where we're going, and we plot it out right. I think that leads to that helps the longevity of some of that stuff that goes on forever. It's one of the things that I don't like about comic books, because comic books these days, the stories are all over the place. You've got writers from all over writing all kinds of stuff, and they come in with a new guy. New guy's like, you know what? All that crap that you knew back in the day, I'm just gonna throw that out. Now we're just gonna go on with some new thing. And I just think that breaks the cohesion of the story over time. Like, you got characters who do stuff that you're just going, I can't believe they even did that. Or the world changes in some way that you're just like, I can't believe that happened. And so anyway, that's just something to think about if you're writing your own stuff. I know it's difficult, but if it was easy, everybody would be a writer, and they're not. But if you're going to write stories for your own game or book or whatever it is that you're going to do, movie, TV show, whatever, then those are things to consider, and those are pitfalls. And just think about that as you're laying it down. Whatever way that you want to go to lay your story down, just think about that so that you can make sure it all fits. So at the end of the story, your readers or people playing your game or whatever, watching your movie will go, wow, that was amazing. And that's the reaction you want to end, right? You want them to go, wow, that's amazing. So anyway, something to think about. So anyway, I think that wraps that up for this particular episode. Thanks for watching and subscribing and everything. I really love doing these things. So if you have any comments or questions or anything, or there's a story that you read that you noticed one of those things happening, leave them down in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to read them, and it'll be interesting to see what other people have to say about that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure there's lots of writers that probably have a different way of doing it and be like, who the fuck does that? But anyway, something to think about anyway. So make sure that you comment, subscribe, share, and ring the notification bell. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Oh, one thing, next time I want to do a Q&A. So if you have questions for the next show, feel free to send them to me on Twitter, or you can send them email or wherever. I want to collect up a few of them, and then next time I'll answer some questions, and we'll do a little Q&A thing. So anyway, you guys have a great day, and thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace out.